Thanks, Julian, and thanks to the Mining Club to hear this story. I think it should be a reasonably interesting story for those of you who have followed Equinox and maybe for some of you that didn't. What I'll do is I'll basically run you through a series of slides that will track the story and give you a feel for what we went through building the company. Certainly wasn't an overnight success. Took 18 years of challenges and survival, and quite a number of you in this room have followed us during that period and been through the challenges yourself. I'll actually go a little bit before Equinox. I'll go back to where the seeds were sown for Equinox, and that was in a company called Hunter Resources that I worked for in the 80s and early 90s. We'll talk about the float of Equinox in '94 and the exploration we did thereafter in Australia and Sweden and Peru, but most importantly Africa. And really the bulk of the talk I'll discuss the Lumwana project and what we were doing in Africa from about '99 through to when we were taken out in 2011. In latter years, of course, we got fairly active corporately with a takeover of Citadel, then a launch on Lundin, and then culminated in being taken out by Barrick in the middle of 2011. So that's the general structure of the talk that I'll give today. Let's go back to Hunter Resources. Hunter floated in '83. I had been working for Pan Continental prior to that, and some of my old Pan Con mates are in the room today. John McIntyre grinning down the front row here. And Bruce Nisbet joined me initially at PanCon, and then we went on to Hunter when John Rowntree and John Thompson formed Hunter coming out of PanCon. Bruce and I essentially ran the exploration effort at Hunter, and that initially focused on the eastern goldfields of WA. Where we found the Mertondale mine and put that into production. We discovered a couple of other deposits, Goongarrie, which became a gold mine, and Murrin, which is still probably one of Australia's best platinum deposits, albeit still in the ground. But the key turning point was a conference that we had at Yalara. You know, most company conferences are junkets, but this one, well, it was a junket, but we actually worked very hard. In fact, on the last morning when we were about to fly out, I realised I hadn't been to the Rock and hurtled down and saw it before we caught the plane. But it was a crucial turning point for the company. It was a very productive conference and came up with 3 priority target types that we're going to chase. Archean gold in the Wiluna Dune D belt. Using, in particular, laterite sampling, Olympic Dam style copper gold mineralisation in the Cloncurry district. This is before IOCG was a commonly known term. It was in fact coined by us a little bit later on. And lastly, Coronation Hill style gold PGMs in the Kimberleys. Regrettably, the last one was a total failure, as exploration is from time to time, but the other 2 really did bear fruit. The gold strategy in the Wiluna Dune D and Murchison belts certainly generated some pretty significant discoveries. We found the Nimiri gold deposit, which ultimately merged into Nimiri Dune D, and is still going today. It's nearly 20 years of production, 5 million ounces, currently run by Newmont. And the Dalgaranga gold deposit, which was much smaller but quite significant and founded effectively Equigold. but most importantly was our iron oxide copper gold exploration effort in the Cloncurry district. We had developed this exploration model looking for Olympic Dam style mineralisation up in the belt, and Bruce Nisbet had particular knowledge of the region, having worked up in the area through the Sahara Belt for Amoco, working for Dave Timms, who's over here. The targets that we developed were undercover, and I still remember very, very distinctly to the day that Bruce Nisbet and Mike Etheridge, who I think is here somewhere too today, called me from Cloncurry pretty excited at what they'd seen out at Mount Fort Constantine. All the right rocks, no copper, but all the right rocks, and Bruce said, peg quickly. So we pegged the ground, and unfortunately at that time Hunter was spending most of its money at Nimmery June D, so we brought in Western Mining as a joint venture partner, and in the second hole got 170 metres of 1.5% copper and a gram of gold, and Ernest Henry was discovered. Of course, there's another saga after that. In fact, I ran into Jim Walls before this presentation, and that's probably another story again for another day. But essentially, with that behind us, Bruce and I decided that we needed to do it for ourselves. We'd had a good run at Hunter. But you know, that was we were not on the board. We were not particularly involved. Didn't make much money out of it, I have to say. But we decided it was time to do it for ourselves. And I guess with our track record, that the pieces started to fall into place. So Bruce and I founded Equinox in '93. Some of the key seed capitalists that came in to back us there, again, are in this room today. There was Peter Woodford and Solomon Pacific, John Horsburgh and Graham Hamilton backed us, and a number of others, and we got the company going with a float in '94, September '94. Raised $9 million, which was a pretty substantial float in those days. And I guess the benefit we had is that we'd essentially pulled the team from Hunter. Part of towards the end of Hunter, basically the principals wanted to go their separate ways, and my job was to sell all the assets, which was a bit frustrating at the time, but the benefit to us was that we were able to basically keep the Hunter team intact. We took the team out of Hunter and set up a consulting group that kept it going until we had Equinox floated. Our initial focus with Equinox was IOCG, of course, in the Cloncurry and Gawler Cratons. And some of you might remember that back in '96, '97, Gawler was all the rage. It was a new province that had opened up, and in fact we made the first discovery there at Nuckola Hill. Another one came up that Helix discovered Tunkilia a little bit to the north of us, about 6 months after us, and the Gawler was off and away and raging. Again, as in the exploration business, Nuckola Hill came to nothing, but I guess the important thing for us is that it got us going and got us on the boards. But times were tough. Early '97, the Bre-X fraud broke. I was at the PDAC in Toronto when that happened, when it all hit the fan, and basically that was the trigger for our business to go into a 7-year decline that really lasted until 2003, and it was a very tough time in the Australian business, as a lot of the people here would understand and remember. Australia in that time was becoming more difficult to explore in. Native title had just been granted or promulgated, and it was creating real issues for exploration in Australia. So we decided to head offshore. Our first foray was to look for IOCG in Sweden, and we developed programs there and pegged a lot of ground. We were one of the first to go into Sweden, and again, it came to nothing in the end, but it was a good growth experience for us. More importantly, we were approached in mid 96 by Anglo American. The technical director of Anglo, Alan McCarran, had heard about our expertise in iron oxide copper gold, and he came to visit our office in Perth and basically said, well, you know, if you guys are so smart in IOCG, why don't you come to Africa and we'll foot the bill? And I thought that sounded like a fair deal. So we decided to develop the concept further, and in fact, as part of that negotiating process, Bruce and I went to Johannesburg and did battle with the lawyers there to nut out this deal with Anglo, and after a few days of that, Bruce, as some of you that knew him would know, didn't really tolerate lawyers too long, and he said, let's get out in the bush. So we decided to leave the lawyers, go and do their thing, and we'd take a week and go and hit some rocks in Zimbabwe and Zambia. We went to Zim first, and Zim, in those days, it's hard to believe, was absolutely chock-a-block with tenements. That you could not get a square inch of ground. Lots of activity, and while the geology was interesting, we decided that really we couldn't get in. We went across to the border into Zambia, and the contrast was extraordinary. It was just totally sleepy. Nobody was exploring there. The mining licenses on the Copperbelt had little mining licenses around them. All the ground in between was open. That first week that Bruce and I were there, we pegged 10,000 square kilometres, and by the time we went back to Johannesburg to finish off the deal with the lawyers, we took a pretty robust view, because we were of the opinion that if Anglo didn't want to come in, well, to hell with them. We had a tiger by the tail, or a lion by the tail, and we're off and running. So as it turned out, we nailed the deal with Anglo. The deal was structured such that the concept was that we would manage the target definition phase, which was envisaged to take about 3 years, and then we would hand over to Anglo to drill out the targets. And the focus by that time was very clearly on Zambia. Through that process, we did a lot of good exploration. We developed a team that really knew how to operate in Zambia and knew the geology and so forth. But we handed over to Anglo in '99, and so we had this team that knew the ropes and had nowhere to go. So we thought, well, what the hell? We'll start looking around for other opportunities. We then saw the opportunity of Lumwana. We knew that Phelps Dodge had been sitting on it for some time, and we were aware of the asset, and we approached Phelps Dodge. I didn't mention that we'd had a JV with Phelps Dodge in the Gawler Craton, so we'd got to know them pretty well. In fact, I think Rob Rutherford's in the room here somewhere. So we'd already developed a good relationship with Phelps Dodge, and we put a pitch to Phelps Dodge that while the deposit didn't look economic at that time, we felt we could go in and add some exploration benefit to it. So that's essentially what we did. Lumwana is up there in northwest Zambia. The historic Copperbelt, of course, is a very big producer. In its day, it was the world's largest, Zambia was the world's largest copper exporter. So it was a major operating belt in its time. But as we've seen over the last few years at Lumwana and Kansanshi and the more recent Sentinel development, the northwest province of Zambia is now becoming the centre of copper production in the country. So we certainly started to gravitate towards that region, and Lumwana was the key there. We struck a deal with Phelps Dodge in '99. Bear in mind, copper was 63 cents. So as you can imagine, PD was really hurting globally, and in fact was in the process of pulling out of Africa. So I guess it's fair to say that we hit them at a good time. We struck a deal whereby we had the right to earn 51% by spending $10 million, and then could earn a further 25% by 24% by spending a further $34 million. My view in the deal was that the second stage didn't matter because either we were going to be into development or not by then. As it turned out, we completed the feasibility and earned the first stage, and then we went to Phelps Dodge and said, how about you come back in and start kicking the tin at 49%. This was in 2003. Copper was still in the mid-70s. They said thanks but no thanks, so we said okay, well how about we give you $5 million and you walk away with a 1% NSR, and we had a further option to buy that out at production for $12.8 million. And that receipt you see there, it says for Lumwana, LML 49, $5 million, handwritten receipt from Phelps Dodge Zambia. I've got that framed on my bookcase at home. In retrospect, it wasn't a bad deal. So our initial focus was exploration. We started pulling it apart on the exploration front and looking, because it hadn't really been explored. The deposit was already known, and I'll show you in a moment, but there really hadn't been much active exploration for at least 10 years and probably more. So it was ripe for applying some modern techniques. Going back to a little bit of exploration history at Lumwana, and that photograph there is of the exploration of the discovery outcrop in the stream at Malundwe. So it's an important outcrop that unfortunately now has been destroyed by miners. People do that. But it goes. Lumwana district was recognised back in the 30s, where prospectors found copper clearings and sniffed around there, but didn't find anything high grade enough to warrant their interest. The key discovery was in 1961 by Rhone Selection Trust, who found Malundwe and then a year later found Chimiwungu. And again, I was talking with Malcolm Hancock of Bear Doll Bear earlier today. He worked here in '69, I think it was, and it's funny. A lot of people have come to me over the years in presentations and said, "Hey, I worked back there in the '60s or '70s." Jeff Reynolds, who was our chairman and is in the room here somewhere. Jeff worked up in the region in the I think it was the '60s. Jeff. I hope I'm not doing you an injustice there. But Zambia then went into a very tough period. 1975, the copper industry was nationalised, and it really didn't start to recover until the mid-90s when the government changed. Well, the president was rash enough to call a democratic election, and that led to a new government being brought in, and a true democracy and a privatisation of the industry has seen a dramatic turnaround in the industry in Zambia ever since. Arjip Kajima looked at the deposit in the late 80s and early 90s. And their focus, of course, was uranium. There's a bit of uranium associated with Malundwe deposit in particular, and they completed pre-feasibility on that. And then Phelps Dodge got hold of it in '92. and of course their focus was back on the copper well and truly. They did pre-feasibility, and again, think back to the time, 63 cents copper when we did the deal, and this project at less than 1% copper was not going anywhere at that time. But when we got hold of it, we started doing exploration. Funnily enough, we got some engineers to have a look at it, and consultants looked at it. Engineering consultants looked at it and said, "Hey, this thing may be just, if the copper price went right for you, maybe it could make money." I know consultants tend to say those things because maybe there's some more work involved, but I took it at face value, and so we kicked it off in parallel with the feasibility. With the exploration, we started doing some scoping studies of what then led into PFS and then BFS, and development really kicked off from about 2003 onwards when we did the full BFS. Exploration, we owned the whole Lumwana dome, or the northern lobe of it, and we did some intensive exploration there. It's a big property, 1,355 square kilometres. Deposits were defined at that stage at Malundwi and Chimiwungu, but Chimiwungu in particular was well open, and we found Kanga to the south of Malundwi, more deposits at Chimiwungu north and east, and then a whole series of prospects through the dome started to look pretty interesting. But in parallel with that, we did initially pre-feasibility. That was positive, and of course the copper price started gradually improving through that. We then did full bankable feasibility, but the challenge back in 2001 was how to fund that feasibility. We'd done a budget on it, $13 million to do the feasibility. At that stage we had principally sum of 300,000 cash. We had a market cap of 7 million, and the equity market in Australia took absolutely no interest in Africa. And so we tried to raise some equity on the market to raise that 13 million, but not surprisingly, with a market cap of 7 million, we were trying to raise double our market cap, and that didn't work. Fortunately, the pre-feasibility work we'd done showed a sufficiently robust project at that time that we managed to convince a number of banks to come in. The key one was the European Investment Bank, who decided that they would stump up half the money on no recourse, effectively on the basis they would put in half of the money, 7 million euros it was, and if the project didn't work, they'd walk away from it without coming back to us. So I think more bankers should take that. I see ANZ's a major sponsor here, so I'd like to have them take on that as a commitment. Three other much more hard-nosed banks got involved at that stage. It was South African Export Development Fund, Rand Merchant Bank, Arnold Vogel's in the room here, and SG, Societe Generale, Nick Farr-Jones, and I think Peter Donkin's here too. And fortunately, these men of vision decided to back us, and certainly the equity kicker that we gave them in the debt facility that we structured with them paid them back, paid our debt back, and we're off and running. 2003, of course, was still a challenge, but this is showing in difficult markets you can find opportunity, and we're in one now, of course. What we did, of course, was essentially acquire a world-class asset at the bottom of the market. We knew it was sub-economic at 63 cents, so we didn't kid ourselves, but maybe one day, who knows. When we were doing when we completed the feasibility, copper was about 80 cents. We optimistically had done our feasibility at 85, and the banks and brokers said, "Oh, you can't use 85 cents. You've got to use 70 cents, 75." But we stuck to our 85 and eventually got them over the line on that. So we had the persistence to sort of keep hammering at it, and in third quarter 2003, I remember very clearly, it was after the diggers and dealers in 2003, which was about August. There were just started to be signs of life, and that was fortunately right at the timing where we were completing our feasibility. We've completed it in October, but still the Australian equity market had no interest in Africa, zero. And so we decided that we had to go to Canada. We fortunately had a good precedent over there. First Quantum was even then doing well on the market, and it was pretty easy story to say to go into the Canadian market and say, well, we're the next First Quantum. Didn't quite work. The stock for a year after we listed in Canada went sideways, but in time it improved, as I'll show you. You can see there for the next year after we listed, more or less, it went sideways. We drifted from the 70 cents issue price down to, I think, a low of about 38 cents, and gradually started to get some traction. We had no coverage in the market, either in Canada or Australia. The first coverage came out of Paradigm, and that was in late 05, and we started to get a bit of traction. We did probably the key finance for us there was that Canadian 28.8 million. It was our first bought deal in the market there, and essentially the money came in the door and straight out the door. We had at that point we were putting in the long lead orders for the SAG and the ball mill and for the mining equipment, and so basically we had a very robust board at that time. Jeff Reynolds was our chairman. Jeff's here somewhere. And we took a very robust view that this was going to go ahead, and we committed those funds virtually straight out the door to buy that equipment. As you can see, that then sort of led through, and we did a number of further major financings. The big one being in late 05, early 06, 145 million Canadian. That was a bit of a landmark financing in the business. We became a verb in the Canadian vocabulary. A lot of the brokers had juniors going to them and saying, "We want to do an Equinox," and not all of them worked. But that was really the key one for us. That got us over the line. We still didn't have the debt in place at that point, but it allowed us to get the construction going in early 06. We did a further top up in June, in late 06, and then towards the end of 06, early 07, we finally nailed the debt. This was a syndicate of 14 banks, primarily out of Europe, London in particular, but a number of development agencies led by Standard Bank and Standard Chartered Bank, and $584 million debt facility put in place. And then finally, just to give us the headroom to complete the construction and operating capital and so forth, we did a 200 odd million in 07. Subsequent to that, we did a couple of others. Over time, so over the period 05 to 2010, we raised about 800 million in equity in Australian dollars, most of it out of the Canadian market, and 640 million of debt. So it was a pretty major financing effort for a company that, as I said, when we did feasibility, we had a market cap of $7 million. But we got Lumwana underway. Construction commenced in early 06 with the clearing of the site that you see there. That was pretty exciting days when you see the first dozers going in, the first pads and so forth. That progressed through 2007 and 2008, and we were on track for completion of construction and commissioning to commence in mid-2008. But those amongst you with sharp eyes will notice the storm clouds gathering there because there was more to come. We're on schedule. Mid-2008 we were doing the pre-commissioning of the mills. That mill's turning there, the SAG mill. Copper price was $3. We were humming. But then whammo. We had a transformer fire in July 2008. And that was an absolute disaster. I was out there when it happened, and boy, there were the tears in the eyes of the people that had put their lives on the line to build this mine. That put us back 5 months and delayed us until about December that year. And furthermore, of course, timing was fabulous. GFC hit in about the same time, and in the middle of the GFC, we had to raise another 80 million to get us through this delay and get us over the hump. Fortunately, our banks were very supportive. They did that. We didn't need to go to the equity market, and the banks stumped up an extra 80 million. Took another kilo of flesh, but we got there. First copper was sold in the first quarter of 2009 at $1.38 a pound. We hadn't quite planned that. $3 in July looked pretty good, but $1.38 was a bit of a shock. But surprisingly, we were cash positive from day one. We just made money at $1.38, but it was tough. But it was we overcame those challenges, and the mine was open on the 17th of April 2009. That's President Banda opening it, guy in the Collingwood jersey there. It was a big deal in Zambia. Virtually the whole of the government ministers and a lot of local politicians and local celebrities and 2,500 guests. This was it was televised live throughout Zambia, and I'll put that on after this presentation for all of you that are fascinated to watch these speeches that went on for about 4 hours. So it was a big deal, and I guess it was a poignant moment for me because my old mate Bruce Nisbet had died a couple of years earlier and of cancer, and I know a lot of you in the room here knew Bruce and loved him as I did. So it was a terrible shame he didn't make it, because it really was the pivotal milestone in Equinox's life. But we now had Lumwana finally into operation. There's the plant, there's the pit. I can't really point it out to you, but the general layout is the yellow blob you see on the left-hand side of the tailings dam. There is the Malundwi open pit design, and down the south is Chimiwungu. Malundwi is going a bit less than 1% copper. Chimiwungu about 0.6. So obviously we mined Malundwi first, the best and best strip ratios and best grade, and we got stuck into that. It's a very conventional operation, open pit We're moving about 100 million tonnes per year of dirt, producing about 20 million tonnes per year of ore. By the time we hand it over to Barrick, we'd pushed that up basically through debottlenecking up to about 25 million tonnes. Very straightforward float recovery of sulphide. We're getting 94% typically, and producing particularly good concentrate grades from Malundwi. It had a lot of chalcocite, not so much chalcopyrite, so we're producing about a 40% con there, whereas Chimiwungo is about a 30% con. And shipping the con to the Zambian smelters. One of the things in Zambia is it's landlocked, so a bit of a captive market, but fortunately we're able to strike reasonable deals with CNMC, the Chinese group, and Vedanta to treat our concentrate. And in 2010, our first really full year of production, we produced 147,000 tonnes of copper at a cash cost, C1 cash cost of $1.38. Keith, good? They're the numbers, okay? I just put out the scale of this operation is quite substantial. That Chimiwungo pit you see down the south there ultimately will be about nearly 3 times the size of the super pit in Kalgoorlie. So these are big pits. Chimiwungo will be about 4 kilometres across and 4 kilometres long, 4.5 kilometres long, and well, who knows how deep. Malundwi was about 5 kilometres long and about 1 kilometre wide. So, you know, this was a big operation, and I'm not saying that the moving of dirt wasn't a challenge. It certainly was. In 2009 we had some serious ramp-up challenges, and for those of you that followed our stock at that time, it was a bit of a battle in the market. People were concerned, but we pulled through in the end. We had a record wet season, worst in 40 years, but we finally got the material movement going. Point out a thing of interest there is the trucks that you see are Hitachi EH4500s, 240-tonne load, and they're hybrid, diesel electric. So as they come up the ramp, they hook onto the overhead wires and run up on electricity, grid electricity, which is very cheap in Zambia, 2.1 cents a kilowatt hour we were paying. And as a consequence, it was saving us about 30% of our operating costs by pulling them up on the ramp there. Fantastic to sit in the jump seat on one of these things. You're going along under diesel, fully loaded at about 7 to 8 kilometres per hour. As the bar goes up and hooks onto the wires overhead, all goes quiet, and this vehicle, which fully loaded is about 450 tonnes, vehicle plus load, accelerates from about 8 kilometres to about 23 kilometres per hour. And it's quite an amazing feeling having that mass sort of just pushing behind you. Anyway, we started to get things going towards the end of 2009, and as you can see in 2010, apart from the wet season, which is always going to be a challenge up in that part of the world, we really started to get the project to hum along. Had a good year of production, 147,000 tonnes. Copper was going well, $3 to $4 a pound, and we started really to generate cash. That year we had revenues over $1 billion. So little Equinox was flying. And there was more upside. The resource overall was about 900 million tonnes, but a lot of that was in the Chimiwungo ore body there. The pit design, which you probably have trouble seeing there's a fine black line that shows the pit design that we were operating on, which was done at $1.20 a pound copper, so it's pretty conservative. But it was based on that main chute that you see in the pink on the left-hand side of that slide. Exploration during that year basically proved up another chute the east, and that had the potential to add very substantially to the to the Chimiwungo ore body, albeit plunging to the south and getting fairly deep. And certainly there's opportunity that we recognise there to push Chimiwungo on its own up to about around about 1 billion tonnes. We discovered a further prospect out to the east about 2 kilometres called Matoma, and it appears that in fact the ore body just keeps on going. It's phenomenal. It's just a massive shear zone that goes a long way. The economics of that, of course, will be governed by the operating costs of the mine, and certainly Barrick's operating costs have more than doubled since we've been there. So how much of that deeper ore is going to be economic, I don't know. We'll probably find out in about 30 years' time. But Lumwana, by that time, was really a mine of global significance. We're in the world's top 20 copper producers, with a resource of over 5.8 million tonnes of copper in the ground. A mining operation humming along at 100 million tonnes per year earth movement and 20 million tonnes, or 25, getting up to 25 of ore. Put us right in into the bottom of the global top 20, and with the cash flow we were generating, we're really starting to hum along. At that point, we decided to look further afield, and I got Carl Hallion to come on the team. Carl's sitting down the front row here to pick me up on all the lies I'm telling. He was our head of business development, and he wasn't going to sit around for too long to die wondering. So we got going and launched an acquisition of Citadel Resource Group that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. They'd done a good job of developing a project in Saudi Arabia, Jabal Sayid, 37 million tonnes of 2.2% copper and 0.3 gold. Modest in scale, but nice grade, underground VMS, capable of producing something in the order of 60,000 tonnes of copper and 15,000 ounces of gold a year. So, it was no Lumwana, but it was a significant asset, and we had a run at that, and for a measly 1.25 billion, bought the company and started the project on the route to development. That, in fact, was our target. There was to have it in production by mid-2012. Some of you that have followed Barrick will know that they've had a few problems in completing that, but the mine is built, the plant is built. In fact, Robert Rigo, who was building it for us, stayed on for an extra year with Barrick to complete that construction. He left Barrick on completion of that in the middle of last year. So it's there ready to roll. They've got a delay that relates to the explosive licence, but that will be a significant mine in due course. Because we didn't have enough on our plate, we decided that we'd show a little bit more ambition and bid for Lundin Mining, 4.8 billion. Lundin had launched a bid in early 2011 for Inmet. We felt that the fit between Equinox and Lundin was better than Lundin and Inmet, but because that deal was already at foot, our bid by its nature had to be hostile. So we launched that. It would have made the combined Equinox Lundin a very, very major copper player on a global sense. We would have been around about the 9th largest copper company and really the 5th largest pure copper play globally. And interestingly, that production profile that I've got there is the one that we had in the show and tells that we were doing around the world at that time. And I checked in retrospect where in fact we would have been in 2013, even without Jabal Sayed. It would have been about 300,000 tonnes of copper, and so we would have been well on track to meet that ultimate target of about 500,000 tonnes by 2016-17. So it was a fairly aggressive move that we made there, and of course it didn't come off. I guess our growth achievements and our plans and our expansion objectives started to attract the attention of others. In March 2011, excuse the French, the shit hit the fan. I was in London, and we got a call from Andrew Mitchellmore of MMG to say that they were launching a hostile bid to make an offer for us at $7 a share. We mounted a very original defence. We said it was inadequate and opportunistic. I've never heard those words used before or since, but call me creative. But it was. We didn't believe $7 was a fair price. In retrospect, maybe you think it was, but we certainly didn't intend to buckle in at that point. And by the way, all through this, my intention and our intention was not to be taken over. We had an objective of building a global copper company, and while I've got a few grey hairs now, I was determined that was going to happen, and I wasn't tired at that point, although when it all happened I realised how tired I was. But whatever, Minmetals had basically put us in play. Clearly we couldn't pursue the Lundin transaction with that happening. The week after the Minmetals announcement, which was a little bit interesting in itself, Minmetals announced an intention to launch a bid. They didn't launch a bid, they announced an intention to launch a bid. That certainly stirred the market, and about 40% of our stock changed hands in the following week, and of course most of that stock finished up in the hands of New York hedge funds. Not that I've got anything against New York hedge funds, but I knew that there was no way back. So basically at that point the board decided that we basically had to see if we could find the best deal for the company. So we conducted a process, as they say. We had several interested parties at the table, but once Barrick had the bit between their teeth, they ran very hard. What we hadn't been aware of is that they'd been looking at us for about a year and running the numbers, so they were ready to roll. Funnily enough, they hadn't been at even on the top tier of our target list. We had them probably around the third tier, but once they got the bit between their teeth, they really ran hard. And ultimately we secured a deal with them for $8.15 Canadian, a bit over $8 Australian, which valued the company at 7.3 billion Canadian, or 7.11 billion Australian. And I guess not surprisingly, we recommended that to shareholders. We thought that was basically as good as they were going to get in the circumstances. Share price performance 2005 to 2011. Construction, you can see, well, you can't really get a feel for that scale, but when we started construction in early 06, we had a market cap of about 134 million. Lumwana fire occurred there. Look, some of you are probably of the opinion that Lehman Brothers started the GFC. It wasn't, it was Lumwana fire, you can see there. It was a major shock to the globe. And there's commissioning. what a perfect timing in the market, eh? Citadel acquisition, we were obviously off and humming by then and were feeling in a fairly robust frame of mind. Lundin offer was at that point, we tracked sideways a bit there. We had had a bit of a challenge convincing the market it was the right thing to do, but we were pulling the market around. I think we had a global roadshow that was getting real traction. Certainly the Lundin shareholders were very unhappy with the Inmet deal and were very keen to take our offer. But then you can see that the Barrick bid had the desired effect, and finally the takeout there at a market cap of around 7 billion. So it was a hell of a ride. When we closed, we were Australia's 37th largest listed company on the ASX, and we were the 7th largest mining company in Australia. So and certainly the only pure copper play up in that region. So we were like to certainly think of ourselves as the go-to copper player in the Australian market. And positioning globally, we were the 20th largest copper producer at that time in 2011, and with Jabal Sayid would have moved us into the top 15. So we certainly fought our way up those ranks. So just to conclude, the evolution of the company. There's very few companies that really evolve from take it all the way from explorer to major producer, while maintaining their independence and not having to sell down ownership. It's a long, hard road. We achieved through this through a lot of determination to keep going through difficult times. You saw some of those graphs. The years we bounced around at 6 or 7 or 8 cents. It was pretty discouraging, but it all came good in the end. So it was that determination and that persistence and the persistence to finance through really difficult times. You think of us where we had to raise 13 million of that crucial BFS financing and had a market cap of less than half that. Well, a lot of people would have said that's impossible. It's not. It is possible. Admittedly, we really had the copper price going with us in those latter years. It's taken a little bit of a pullback now, but it's it was through those latter years really was the key to the ability that we had to ride the market and to finance our going forward. We had a fantastic team, and we're still very close. Carl ran the BD for me. Mike Klessens was CFO, and Robert Rigo was head of project development. We're still working together. We had a fantastic board that was led by Peter Thompson as chairman, and a very good board that took us through those last challenging years in particular. And it was just a matter of setting the goals that we needed and achieving them. And lastly, the shareholders that came with us were pretty well rewarded. From 2003 onwards to 2011, share price appreciated from 6 cents to $8.15, 13,580% increase. And the market cap of the company increased further, of course, because of all the financings we did. Went from 5.5 million to 7.3 billion, 132,000% increase in market cap. So quite a story. Okay, thanks.